live from beautiful 50-50, well, sort of beautiful 50-50, a little tired 50-50 Yonge Street in the heart of North York, Ontario. This is the May the 13th meeting of the Toronto District School Board Special Education Advisory Committee, or SEAC. My name is David Lepofsky. I'm the representative on SEAC for the Ontario Parents of Visually Impaired Children, and I'm the chair of SEAC. Before we do introductions, I just thought I'd give a little introductory remark or two, because we have some people who watch the video either live or archived, and I thought it would be helpful to take 1 minute to just explain who we are. The Special Education Advisory Committee of the Toronto District School Board is an official committee created by provincial law. The province, under its Education Act, requires every publicly funded school board to appoint a committee called the Special Education Advisory Committee to give advice to the trustees and staff of the board on how to better meet the needs of students with special education needs. Our committee members are all volunteers. We're not paid to be here. We donate our time in two possible roles. Some of us represent organizations of parents of kids who have a particular special education need. I'm here on behalf of kids who are either blind or low vision, and other organizations are identified that way as well. And we also have community representatives who are individuals who are parents typically who've got kids in the system, in the school board, and who bring their own perspective to bear as we discuss. Our role is to give feedback to the board, either where they come to us and ask us for our feedback, or where we say, hey, we've got an important topic and we don't need to be asked. We're just going to roll up our sleeves and give feedback. And you'll see both of those things happening tonight. We'll begin by going around and introducing who's in the room. If people who are online on Zoom, when you are going to be contributing to our discussions, I'd appreciate it if you would just say who you are and who you represent, rather than just when it's time for you to speak, so people who are watching from home can know who you are. But we'll just do a round robin of introductions of who's in the room here. We have a combination of three kinds of folks, all nice folks, but we have SEAC members, we have board staff, and we have a few people who have come to present to us tonight, who are on the agenda. So let me start on my right. Oh, do you want to do the land acknowledgement? Yeah. And then we will do our land acknowledgement.
Please rise for the land acknowledgement.
Do our land acknowledgement first. Thank you.
We acknowledge we reside on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, as well as the importance of establishing and maintaining cultural safety through learning from Indigenous peoples and perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll go around and introduce, and Leanne, when we get to you, could you also identify who's here as a trustee tonight when we get to around to your part? Okay.
I'm Richard Carter, Vice Chair of SEAC and representing the Down Syndrome Association of Toronto.
Hi everyone, my name is Yikai Zhou and I am the current student trustee and I am representing the students of the Toronto District School Board.
Hi, my name is Jenny Zhang. I currently represent the students of Learning Center 1, but coming next year, I will represent the whole of the whole of TDSB as a student trustee.
Hi there, my name is Tracy O'Regan and I'm here representing Community Living Toronto.
Hi, my name is Nora Green and I'm here representing Inclusion Action in Ontario.
Hello, everyone. My name is Effie Stathopoulos, and I'm one of the centrally assigned principals for special education and inclusion.
Good evening. My name is Nandi Palmer. I'm the system superintendent for special education and inclusion.
My name is Katia Palumbo, and I'm the centrally assigned principal for special education and inclusion.
Elizabeth Schaefer, centrally assigned principal, special education and inclusion.
Leo Lagnado for representing Autism Ontario. Thank you. Hi, Leanne Dixon. I'm the SEAC liaison. And I wanted to also welcome trustees Dan McLean, Debbie King, Shelley Laskin, Sarah Earhart. And there are a couple of people that I can't identify, so if they are trustees, I apologize for not acknowledging you. There are some names that just have first names, so if anybody who's on Zoom could just correct their name so that we either have the full name or their role, that would be very helpful for minutes as well. Thank you.
Okay, and a slight correction, we are going to have Richard introduce who's online, and I just want to explain for people watching, there are 3 trustees who are appointed to serve on SEAC as full SEAC members, but we've reached out to all the trustees and invited them to come on a kind of rotating basis, and we've got some of them tonight, and we appreciate their volunteering their time. They are part-time on the school board, they have lives and lots of other things to do, and volunteering their time to come to join us tonight is something we really appreciate.
Thank you, David. I actually won't go through the list of people online because the list keeps changing as people move around and everything here. So let's recognize everybody that is here online. There is a long list of names, and appreciate you joining us tonight.
All right, let's jump into the agenda. We have a draft agenda, and I would like to see if we can have a motion to approve the agenda.
Nora, and a seconder? Leo? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
Any conflicts of interest that any SEAC member needs to declare on any agenda item for tonight?
Seeing no conflicts of interest in the room, no hands raised, nor online.
Leanne, can you just tell me, were the minutes circulated? I just want to make sure, because I'm not sure whether everybody has gotten them or not from our last meeting.
I believe so. I'm going to double check the email, but I believe they were distributed with the mail out.
Let's put that to the end of the meeting for now. I want to just do one introduction. Online is Alana Bell, who is the new representative who's been appointed by TDSB to represent the Association of Bright Children. Alana, welcome aboard. And looking forward to having you on our team and hearing the input that you will be able to share with us.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Now, I want to begin our formal agenda with a delegation. Is our delegate present here?
We only have. Online. They're online. Sorry.
Okay. Just so everybody understands, this is different committees do this in different ways, and we're kind of feeling our way along. But we've had a student who is soon to be finishing at the board, as I understand, who's asked to speak to us for 5 minutes about their experience at the board. And we figured, why not? Because it's going to be a lead into the immediately next agenda item, which is going to be inviting our student trustees to help us brainstorm ways for us to amplify the voices of students with special education needs at TDSB. So let's start out by hearing from one. So Betiel, would you be kind enough to tell us who you are? And we'll give you 5 minutes. So tell us what you'd like to share. And thank you for joining us.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you to Nora Green. I know I ran to her in Young and Bloor, so I want to say first off to her, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Betiel Teki. I've been with the board since 2011 of November. My education started falling apart in 2013 of May. I'm going to just give you a little summary. My parents' decisions and output were not respected. In fact, the school repeatedly said to my parents they are in control of my education, and never got proper academic regular classes, never got the materials, never got the proper education. In fact, I had to teach other kids that were in the regular classes, which was not appropriate. Then the middle school put me in non-credit in high school till 21, put MID on it, and there was a psych assessment that was not given consent or known about. I had to fight for many years with teachers, principals, psychologists, and psychologist boss. Then I had enough and I contacted the director. Thankfully, the director gave me 2 lovely executive superintendents and Karen Murray, as she's here. I just want to talk about how this affects Black students and what could help. For me, I've had very, very bad mental health, still impacts me to this day. Uh, I've had episodes, I've had passing out times, I've had to be in the hospital for days, I had to have emergency authorities get involved. Even I have seen this with other fellow Black students where I had to help them advocate with police, with mental health workers, and contact even social worker bosses for them. And I still see to this day that Black students are not given proper support, that Black students are being pushed to the side, that Black students are being told to switch careers. I've even been told that, and I still have to fight to this day. It gets tiring when I see Black students wanting to be successful and Black students wanting their dream career. And I also want to bring a view of an immigration Black student because I'm not from here. And it's sad when you come and you are coming to this country for more opportunities, for making your family brings you here for better life, but you also want to help your family and do better and do great and give back to your community back home. Sadly, I could not do that. And sadly, I could not go to university due to my middle school having a lot of control. And it's sad because there's Black students that are not like me. They're not going to say, let me contact the trustees, let me contact the superintendents, let me contact the director because I'm tired. They're just going to give up and drop out. So I think that the TDSB, if SEAC is willing to help, I think the TDSB needs a backup plan where there's students that are being streamed into non-credit or locally developed or applied and haven't had the skills for years. There needs to be a separate education like plan for them to pick up quickly. And then for students that are still streamed that are not showing up, I think there needs to be a keep up and a check in with the data just to make sure that we're pushing these Black students to their ultimate best. I can do my part and help these Black students and give conversations to parents that are newcomers or that have been in Canada, but there's so much I can do as a young Black girl. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, I want to begin by thank you for showing tremendous courage in discussing this in a very candid and open and articulate way when it's a deeply personal and stressful topic that you're telling us about. Now, I want to also, for the benefit of anybody listening, explain how SEAC uses this kind of information. We don't investigate individual incidents or whatever, and as well, the school board, because of their privacy requirements, we don't turn to them and say, well, what's your answer? So this is, but that doesn't mean that this is unhelpful, very much the contrary. But Yael, what we are going to be doing is right now turning to our next agenda item, which directly involves what you've illustrated. You've given us an individual illustration of frustration you've experienced. And what we want to do is now invite two student trustees, one who is a student trustee this year, but graduating, and one who will become a student trustee in the fall, to talk to us about what ideas we could recommend to the TDSB to enable the voices of students with special education needs, including those who may be labeled as having special education needs, even if that label turns out not to be an appropriate label, which are among the issues we've just heard about. And I want to use the time we've got to that end. So Bethiel, I want you, and after we're done, if you think of any ideas, if you want to stay on and listen as a listener, and you can think of other ideas about how we can enable voices of students like yours, feel free to email them into us and we will share them with our committee. So thank you very much for taking the time and showing the courage and being so articulate and level-headed in talking about things that are far from easy to discuss, much less in public. I'd like to invite our two student trustees to come up to the, I don't know what you call this, the head table or whatever. Head table sounds like you get good food. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to just ask you both a couple of questions, and then we're going to go around the table and invite my colleagues from SEAC to either offer ideas or ask you questions to help get your ideas. So the Toronto District School Board just approved a four-year multi-year strategic plan. And in it, among other things, they say they want to amplify student voices. You two are, well, one has been a student trustee, the other is going to be, for 250,000 students, which is a heck of a job. 40,000 of them, more than 40,000 of them, are students with special education needs. And there could be more that aren't recognized. And we want to get your thoughts on how to enable their voices to be heard in an organized way, just as others have been heard. So can you tell us a little bit first, what the heck is a student trustee and why are you doing it? You want to pick who wants to go first?
I guess as the outgoing student trustee, I'll start off. Thank you, Mr. Lepofsky, for inviting us to this very important conversation. I guess just to start off, a student trustee is basically a student, a senior student that is elected by TDSB students from grades 7 to 12 to basically represent student voices within the Board of Trustees. So we advise the board on issues that concern students and provide perspectives that students have to the board. And for me personally, why I became a student trustee was because I've noticed a lot of issues that students are complaining about and how they want an increased voice in the decision-making that the board is considering, which is why I wanted to step up and be that voice for the students. So that's basically my idea of what a student trustee is and why I became a student trustee. I know Jenny is our new student trustee, our incoming student trustee for next year. So Jenny, do you want to add on?
So yeah, a student trustee just basically represents all students in TDSB. And adding on to what Yikai said, we represent their voices through monthly meetings. So that job is put on the Student Senate, which I'm currently a part of. And basically every month, we invite student volunteers to come and share their voices and their opinions on certain topics or anything they really want to talk about. And we relay that information to student trustees, and they get the opportunity to represent those thoughts at board meetings. And for me personally, I wanted to become a student trustee because I felt that, you know, my position as a student senate member wasn't achieving as much as I wanted to. And so I think becoming a student trustee allows me to contribute more to our board and allows for greater change.
Okay, well, number one, it's amazing that you're able to devote the time that requires when you're also trying to get through your time at school, and then volunteer your time to come to talk to us tonight. So let's get right to business. 40,000 or more students, all the way from kindergarten up to secondary school, who may be deaf, or they may be blind, or they may have autism, or they may have an intellectual disability, they may have a physical disability, they may have mental health issues, they may have combinations, since nobody comes in an isolated silo. They may be gifted and have one or more disabilities. They may have ADHD, you know the whole spectrum, because you see colleagues in the student population. How do we, and these folks, these students face any number of barriers in the school system itself, just getting their education, and it would benefit trustees and us here at SEAC to hear not only from parents, but from students. How do we hear, how could we better empower their voices within using the language of the multi-year strategic plan? Anything you'd want to suggest that we should be suggesting to trustees?
I think one of the major issues with student leadership and student representation within the board, that something that I particularly struggled with this year with my term, and I think Jenny also struggled with within her Senate term, was that there's no particular structure within the TDSB that really helps elevate student voices. So there isn't really a representative system that is concrete within the board that students can go through to really have their voices amplified to the board levels. And I think that's an issue that's all around, and especially for students with special needs, that issue becomes more amplified. So I think a proposal that I suggest is that the board consider more structured methods of gathering student voice and really amplifying that student voice to the TDSB. And I think for students with special needs, we need to create that space where students feel comfortable coming to the board or coming to their student trustees to share their concerns with their education. So what I would recommend is maybe the TDSB consider establishing something like a student collective dedicated for students with special needs. I know that we already have one for equity, so we have the Student Equity Collective. Why not expand that to include a collective for students with special needs? So those are some of my ideas. SEAC, feel free to hop in, and Jenny, feel free to hop in as well.
Jenny, do you have any ideas you want to share at this point, or shall we open it up to my SEAC colleagues to chime in?
I think I can also add that another method to represent the voices of kids with special education is to reach out to them. And I know it should be, like currently we open the opportunity to students, and they have the choice or the opportunity to come in to our meetings and give their input. But I think it's really also important to reach out to students with special education. And I know that like when you personally reach out to people, they're more willing to come in, take the time, and give you their input. So yeah, a method could be to reach out to teachers, principals that are connected with these students, and personally invite them to come in and speak with us.
Okay, that's great. Let's see if we can get a speakers list, and because we have a rather full agenda, I'm going to ask people to chime in if you've got an idea you want to just bounce off our student trustees, and we can discuss it further later at a future meeting. But let's consider this a quick brainstorming session.
Okay, I see Nora's hand up. So Nora, if you want to go first, and anybody online, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand online so I can see your interest.
Thank you, and thank you so much for coming. And I just wanted to echo Betty L's comments about how strong she is in her own self-advocacy, and that very few students would take the time to contact an association and senior officials to bring their concerns forward. So in order to make that easier, I'm just curious about your thoughts about why you think that needs to be separate from the Equity Collective. And it's just a question, like, so you see it as a different collective than being part of what is already equity. And I'm just curious why you feel like that's a different structure, needs to be a different structure, and not to say that that's not right, I'm just curious. Thank you.
Whether you want to comment?
Yeah. So I think It could be a part of the Equity Collective, as I think the Equity Collective like addresses the same concerns, right? But I feel like within the equity space, oftentimes students with special needs are kind of forgotten in the whole sphere, right? I know Mr. Leposki came to our recent board meeting and he kind of highlighted the differences between equity and equality and how when talking about special needs, we often use the equity lens when it would be much better to focus on the equality lens for students with special needs. So I think that's a perspective that I'm bringing to this conversation as to why maybe perhaps there should be a separate committee for students with special needs. But again, that is up to the board and what they feel fits.
Okay, we've got 3 other SEAC members who've got their hands up, so we're going to identify them, go through them, and then we'll be closing off this, but with a plan to follow up with future discussions during the year. So who've we got?
Okay, Aileen, Bronwyn, and then Leo. Aileen, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you, everyone, and through the lens of community living on Toronto, together with Tracy here, I'm just so excited to hear Bethel and the student trustees share through the student lenses, because ultimately why we are here is for you, especially those who have special needs challenges. So my thoughts are, I think you have a world of knowledge, fruitful agencies and community representatives. I think through the partnership of a scheduled maybe monthly meeting that the student trustees, and also if Bethel, I don't know what your future plans are, but I think you're a strong advocate, and I'm with you. I just want to say that just wanted to support the employment outcome for those who happen to be graduated through the lens of transitioning from TDSB to future next steps. And I think that it's a lot of things by referrals if we're talking about numbers. And I think that if we have success stories such as Bethel's, and I can see, it comes through circle to include in the outcome of getting students enrollment and all of that. So if I know somebody's doing well, I would like to join why they are doing well. So that's just wanted to share this as a future consideration, how to partner and utilize the resources here around the table and us together. Thank you.
Thank you, Aileen.
Thanks so much. Let's get the other 2 SEAC members in, and then we'll see if we can get a response collectively from our 2 guests.
Bronwyn, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I think it's all phenomenal ideas that I've heard tonight, and it's exciting to see students lead this initiative. I would love to also see this put together as a committee for our younger voices like yourselves who are older, who can advocate and you develop these skills. The problem that I'm seeing having younger children is that they are not developing these younger, like in their younger years, the advocacy skills that they need. And I'm concerned that they're not going to be up here at SEAC advocating like yourselves. And I think it's important as parents get more education and awareness that SEAC still does exist, because it is still very true that people do not know the power and importance of us. And I think we have to reach those little ones who don't have voices with the parents who are still really drowning and overwhelmed with even their child's diagnosis. It's new to them. Some of them don't even know how to talk about it yet in public. And I think it's really a grieving process that parents aren't really even sometimes ready to face what is being given to them in that early years. And I think we need to have a support system from parent mentors who are being through this on the ground to get them, to encourage them that they have this safe space, and to prepare them to get their little ones' advocacy skills to be there like you someday. So thank you.
Thank you. And Leo, please.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much for coming forward. I think that your proposal about the collectives actually resonates a lot with us at Autism Ontario, since one of our official position statements is actually that students on the autism spectrum, where possible, should be actively engaged throughout their education processes, full partners in education, that giving them optimal learning across home and school. I'm not sure you know, but autistic students, they represent the largest, apart from gifted, group of special education students in the board. Do you think that they could warrant having their own collective, given that their needs are very different from some of the other special needs groups? How would you encourage these students to set up their own collective, if so? Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to add one little quick add-on, and then any closing remarks you want to make in response. One of the things I learned from you folks when we were chatting, and when I was at the board meeting last month, is that there are 2 elected student trustees, and the board also, from what you explained to me, also appoints one to serve as the Indigenous trustee, student trustee. I thought that is a great idea, to sort of proactively make sure that that perspective is shared. What would you think of the idea of the board appointing a student with special education needs as a designated trustee in the same sort of way to be a student trustee, so that we, as a proactive attempt to amplify their voice in a system which, as we've said, they don't have much of an avenue right now to raise their distinctive concerns. Could I just get your comments on what I said, what Leo, what Bronwyn, Eileen said, any of them? All, any, none, whatever you prefer. Jenny, why don't we start with you?
I think appointing a student with special education is a good idea. It's important to have someone from different groups be represented. And even though in TDSB, students with special education are, a smaller group, I think it's still important to have their thoughts represented, especially things that especially concern them. For example, the budget planning. I know the student trustees were involved in that. So I think it's important to have a student that is part of special education to contribute to how money is allocated to those programs. So yeah, I do think it's very important to have those thoughts represented within the board.
Okay, and final remarks?
I guess just to add on to Jenny's point, I also agree that I think it is a good idea. But just speaking realistically, under the Education Act, unfortunately, there can only be 3 student trustees. So if we wanted to add in a position, a student trustee position specifically dedicated to students with special needs, that would unfortunately have to go through to the ministry. As to Leo's question, I think students with special needs vary a lot, right? And I think the needs of students with different disabilities per se do require different needs and accommodations. So I think there could be a broader committee for students with special needs, and within that committee there could be subcommittees. For example, one for students with autism that would particularly represent their concerns within this greater committee. And I think it would be helpful to also have that united voice, but also have specific concerns that different communities want to bring to the board level.
All right, listen, thank you both very much for coming. You're welcome to stay. If you want to sit somewhere and listen in, or otherwise, we will look forward to staying in touch, and thanks for your time. On behalf of everyone, Nora, I know you wanted to chime in, but we're actually already behind, and I want to keep moving, so we'll get you a chance to get your point in at some point. Just hang on to it. I want to move to our next agenda item, and it's one that I'm leading the discussion of, so I want to just give a 3-minute explanation, and then this is one where we're not asking the staff to comment. This is for us to comment to staff and let them take our feedback back. and perhaps we'll hear from them at a future meeting. So what's the issue? There is a problem at TDSB that is not created by TDSB. It's a problem at every school board. It's created by the Ministry of Education, but it's one that each school board still has to solve. And it's not an issue of money or changing major things. It's pretty simple. And I want to identify it, and then I want to, it's in my chair's report, which I regret inadvertently didn't reach you till this afternoon, so you may not have had a chance to read it. But we'll also, for people watching online, will be, my chair's report, like our other documents, will be online and available for reading. But it goes like this. The special education program that each school board offers is created under Ontario's Education Act and its special education regulations. They say who is eligible for special education. They are defined as, this is their words, exceptional pupils. And exceptional means they have a condition that the law defines, the Education Act and regulations, defined as an exceptionality. And there are certain conditions which do, and certain which don't. And under the Education Act, everything we know about individual education plans, identification placement review committees, everything is defined for students who have an exceptionality. And yet, we have a second law on the books. It's a very important law. It supersedes all other laws. It's paramount over them. And it's the Ontario Human Rights Code. It provides that everyone, including every student, has the right to equal treatment with respect to things like services and facilities. Education is a service or a facility, without discrimination because of disability. And it provides as well that that right to equal treatment includes a duty to accommodate their disability, where you need to, so the person can fully enjoy and benefit from the service. So TDSB has a duty to accommodate students with disabilities. And the Human Rights Code has a definition of disability. It's in my chair's report. It's very broad. I know a lot about it because I was involved way back when in lobbying for how it would be worded. But it's broader than the definition in the Education Act of exceptionality. So the school board has a duty under the Human Rights Code to accommodate students with any kind of disability so they can fully benefit from education. But the special education program under the Education Act is defined in that act and its regulations as only going to students who have an exceptionality, which includes some disabilities, but not all of them. So the problem is, what if you have a child who has a disability which doesn't qualify as an exceptionality under the Education Act, what's available for you? Now, here's what we know. We know that the school board is committed to, and as said, it's committed to honoring its obligations under the Human Rights Code. And we know from practical experience, the teachers want to teach all kids, but there's a kind of legal or bureaucratic thing that gets in the way, or can get in the way. Not something the TDSB created, but if you read that multi-year strategic plan, it talks a lot about removing barriers. This is one of them. Now, the risk is that in a school board with 250,000 students, with thousands of teachers and hundreds of principals, that someone there might think that well, an individual education plan, that's only for kids with an IEP. So I asked staff if there's any direction to teachers and principals that explicitly says that a child can be entitled to accommodation, including, if needed, an individual education plan, even if their disability does not constitute an exceptionality. And I got very helpful information very quickly from Nandy, and I appreciate your turning it around literally within a couple of days. And it's clear that the board is trying to be flexible, but the language is not as clear as I think it needs to be. So what do we do? So what I want to do is first ask SEAC members, have you experienced, or your associations experienced, any difficulties with this? Is this a problem? And what do you think the board could do about it? For my part, and I'm not proposing a motion tonight or anything, this is just a discussion for a few minutes. For my part, my thought is it would be very helpful if the board did two things. And we're not asking staff to comment on this, they're here to listen tonight. I don't want to put them on the spot. They're here to listen and learn, and we all are. But the two things that could be done is the board could put a statement, make a public statement, like on its website, that says we will accommodate to the best of our ability students with any kind of disability, whether or not it fits within an exceptionality. So parents can know that that's the board's position. And the second thing is the board could direct its teachers and staff to that effect, have a policy statement or a protocol or whatever they want to call it, but something that says it. So there's no risk of ambiguity. And I know it I'm going to wrap up my quick introduction by saying, I certainly have talked to at least one parent who said their child needed an IEP, but they were told that because their particular condition, while a disability under the Human Rights Code was not an exceptionality, the particular school they were at thought they were not eligible for an IEP. And so it can be a problem. Now, that may be the only one. You may have heard of others. I want to invite feedback from SEAC members. Have you heard of this as a problem? What, if anything, might we do about it or recommend be done about it? Let me turn it to Richard to manage a speakers list. I'm going to ask if we could keep it to 2 minutes each, because we got lots more to talk about at our meeting, and it's not our only chance to talk about it.
Thank you, David. I've set the timer at 2 minutes. On the current speakers list, we have Trustee Hastings, myself, Jean-Paul, and Diane. Trustee Hastings, if you'd like to go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your thought on just that. I have just recently come into a couple of cases just like that, and it's something that the student trustees have mentioned. And David, thank you very much. Wonderful thought. I would like to hear some more about it. I got just the situation where my students have been labeled and said, no, you don't have an exceptionality, but they do. Thank you very much. If you could continue, I'd much appreciate it.
And just to be very clear, the board, like all boards, does not require the exceptionality to be identified at a formal identification and placement review committee, or IPRC. That's a process they don't require if they, in order to accommodate a student. That is clear, that's always been their policy, and that's good. The question here is not the process, but it's what conditions, whether they're whether they have as a policy something which overcomes this limitation in the Education Act. Sorry, go ahead. Who's next?
I happen to have the next question, David. Thank you. And question to staff, and not to specifically state, but I think maybe Elizabeth can help with this. I couldn't read the special ed plan quick enough tonight, but I was curious, and you don't have to answer now, but maybe towards the end of this discussion or when we get to the special ed plan, how the special ed plan addresses IEPs for students without identified exceptionality, or does it? I was trying to find wording, and I couldn't really tie it down before the meeting, so hopefully we can get some clarity on that. Don't feel like you have to answer now. If you wish to, go ahead, but if not, we can defer the question.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is let's defer it so we can get all of our feedback together, because I told staff in advance that this was going to be a listening session.
Fair enough.
And I don't want to subject anybody to have to read that whole thing.
Exactly. Okay. Jean-Paul is next. Thank you.
JP, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you, David. Thanks. I mean, it's great to to hear from our students trustee today, and thanks, David, for bringing up again this limitation of this Education Act. And I think when I I've thought about this, and I think maybe we can we can do something as SIAC, to kind of raise this to the ministry, because it's all about addressing the limitation of the Education Act, to include some requirement from the Ontario Human Rights Court. Then that is something that we can already do to get it to get the people in the bureaucrat, and to prepare something for the politician to make the necessary change to the Education Act.
That's
what I would suggest.
That's a really good idea. Okay.
Okay, next on the list, Diane.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yes, great points, David. And I think I understand the importance of accommodating everyone. I totally agree with that. But I also have an issue with having more IEPs, because what ends up happening is the more people are on IEPs, the harder it is to manage all the people on IEPs. And I think, from what I know of, Ontario and maybe even TDSB has a lot of people with IEPs. So what I think is we should try to find a way to focus on the training of staff, focus on the training of I don't know what the answer is, but I just think that IEPs is one of the answers, but I think it's much broader than that, because it just puts a lot of people on IEPs and things may not get done because nobody can manage them, because they're managing all these IEPs. So, when we talk about training and inclusive education specifically, and we're trying to accommodate all the people in the class, it goes back to all the UDL that we talked about, and training people on how to accommodate everyone in the class, because everyone in the class, there's many people in the class that are never even going to hit an IEP, especially people with invisible disabilities. And we can't just go and get IEPs for everyone. So let's focus on how do we get back to the class and figure out a different way of doing it. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Diane. Who's next?
We have Nora next with a silent hand. Go ahead, Nora.
Thank you. I think, David, it's a really important topic, because this is why the equity work and including disability in equity work is so important, because I think that IEPs have different impacts on different people. And I think what's happened right now, and I'm going to be totally transparent about my beliefs, is we have vilified the IEP. So now there are staff running around preventing children from having IEPs who legitimately have disabilities. And that's the only place, my understanding would be, that you would legally document the accommodations the child's entitled to. It's their right under the code. I also think PPM 11, which is the responsibility of the board for early identification of children, not later, not waiting, is also a huge responsibility the board has to engage in, because we know there are disabilities who benefit from early supports and interventions and have different trajectories because of that. So that sort of Leo, the late bloomer, or let's wait and see how things progress. For a student with a disability, that can be valuable time with an SLP, an OT, whomever. So when you don't do disability work with equity and talk about the realities that some kids, very much like our first speaker tonight, who speaks about possible harm from what has happened to her, but then there are other kids who are equally being harmed by not getting them. And how are you making sure that staff are aware that A, the Education Act is not the definitive document about disability, that the Human Rights Code supersedes that, and there are children who are coming in with disabilities that are not exceptionalities, they're entitled to an IEP, and do that in a timely manner so that they get the support. So I guess it comes down to two: are your supports worth the supports that they're putting on paper? So do our supports actually improve their outcomes? Do we know the programs we're delivering are improving the performance of our students, or are they labels, programs, and we're streaming children? All those are really serious conversations. And I really want to thank the trustees tonight for sharing their perspective about where disability belongs, because they're a reflection of the microcosm and the equity work that's been done to date,
Thank you, Nora.
which has not included disability.
Okay, final two speakers, Trustee Arts and then Isabella.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so I would reflect a bit of what Diane said in terms of my experience. I have not had complaints from parents, or about getting an IEP for their kid when there's a delay, they have a learning need, whatever the background is. But we have run into roadblocks. We have run into, I think, a split still, and more work needs to be done between administrators, so those who are getting central training and getting the messages that Nandy's office, like the Spec Ed office, is delivering. There's definitely a difference in what's coming from principals and what's coming from some teachers. So I have had parents reach out that, and what Nora spoke about, and Diane spoke about different needs and sometimes invisible disabilities, especially in secondary, where kids have, mental health issues become very prevalent for a variety of different reasons. Kids need accommodations. They don't necessarily need an IEP, but they need accommodations. And I've had principals say, yes, come, we'll accommodate you. What do you need? Only to have the teachers working with them. So if you think in a term that a high school student has 4 teachers, have some of those teachers go, yes, let's accommodate. Let's figure out what you need to be successful. And 2 other ones say, oh, you don't have an IEP? No, I'm not doing that. And so, yes, the system has work to do to get that consistency. And I would like to see more focus, because that second response from a teacher that you need an IEP for an accommodation is wrong. It's just wrong, and is not the expectation of our system. And I have to assume these are, maybe also teachers that have not gone through the 2-year degree, or have not taken extra spec ed, but certainly that's not the goal of the system. So there's still more work to do there. But I don't, yeah. And I think when we get to the spec ed plan, I think there's some interesting pieces about the new expectations about ILPs, the individual learning plans, and focus on that I think are really important in terms of accommodating all students, especially those who don't have ministry identified exceptionalities. I also believe that you guys should write to the ministry, because you have that capability, or the committee should. We should as a committee, because I don't believe that the ministry's exceptionalities and their review is actually up to date with the world.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Isabella, please. And then we have one more, Alana Bell, and that's the end of the question period. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Having worked on the Special Education Plan Committee and actually diving deep into the Ministry of Education Act and also Human Rights Code for people with disabilities, I couldn't at first quite understand why the language was different in how they were defined, the exceptionalities, and when clearly some of these exceptionalities were disabilities, until I've realized that perhaps this is ministry's way of dealing with the long backlog of and wait lists of diagnosis for students. And so calling it exceptionality means that you don't need a diagnosis from a doctor and that students can be accommodated. The problem is that I think that at some schools, the principals and teachers, their interpretations become too dogmatic. And even if a student has a disability and a diagnosis, that is whether it's ADHD or another condition that doesn't fit quite perfectly or is not identified by ministry, those parents are having a difficult time getting accommodations for the students. I think there needs to be a broader discussion of how these things connect, why we are calling them exceptionalities, how does this then fit then with the longer trajectory when our students are actually leaving and going to colleges and universities, because some of those IEPs are no longer being actually even acknowledged.
20 seconds left.
So my point is that I think this is even a bigger issue, and some of this has to do with understanding of the broader contours of why we have actually come to call it as exceptionalities, where clearly students with disabilities it should be part of that, but even with diagnosis, they don't get the accommodations.
Thank you.
So, thanks.
Hey, Alana Bell, final speaker.
Alana Bell, this is your debut input at the Special Education Advisory Committee. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to start off by saying what a great night to start. It's my pleasure to be able to hear from all of the students, but also to be able to join this conversation. And I didn't actually think I had anything to add, but then I was listening to Michelle and I realized that I did. This is more about the timeliness of students being provided accommodations, because the students that I'm thinking of in particular are ones with gifted exceptionalities. So they are recognized as exceptionalities by the TDSB, but we typically don't have programming starting until grade 4. And so what we have heard of and what we have experienced is students being identified as having a gifted exceptionality or being diagnosed with a gifted exceptionality earlier than that grade 4 cutoff, and then being denied accommodation because they're not yet in grade 4. Typically, I think when kids are being identified as gifted at younger than grade 4 before the universal screening, it's because something else has arisen. So in the case of one student of my own son, it was significant anxiety that had arisen and prevented him from attending school on a regular basis. And in our investigation of that anxiety, we discovered that he was gifted, and it was the psychologist's idea that helping him with that to be appropriately challenged and to be sort of working at his level would help with the anxiety. But we at the time were denied any accommodations because he wasn't yet in grade 4. And that's something that we're hearing from our members on a I wouldn't say a relatively regular basis, but it is something that is coming up with our members.
All right, well, thank you. What I'm going to do is suggest that I'm going to ask the staff to take this issue away, and they can apply their thoughts and maybe come back to us. And I'm going to invite us to take what we've heard away and look at how we might move forward on this, because there are two streams of recommendations, one about alerting the ministry and the other about what more the TDSB could do. And I've got ideas crystallizing from what we've discussed. Let me now move to so thank you, everybody. I want to move to the next agenda item. This is an unusual meeting because there are two big items that I'm actually leading on. I don't want that to be the way the year is, but this meeting is. this is a report from the K-12 working group. For the benefit of those at this meeting or visiting or watching online to know what this is, the provincial government appointed an expert committee of disability community representatives and educators back in 2018 to recommend what reforms are needed at school boards to ensure that students with disabilities get barrier-free accessible education under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. That committee rendered its report in January of 2022. Sadly, the government of Ontario has not implemented it yet, though a number of us are advocating for it to happen. I was on that committee, by the way. One of the issues it identified that was a problem, SEAC set up a working group, which I'm chairing, a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, to make recommendations to the board about what it should be doing. One of the areas we identified is the need for the board to come up with a much better way of letting parents of students with special education needs know what's available for their child, what different programs, classes, placements, services, supports, and where to go to learn more or to advocate for them. Now, this SEAC raised this as a concern in a very comprehensive motion 6 years ago next month, and that's in your materials for today's meeting. Unfortunately, it did not lead to any significant changes at the board. And so SEAC did a survey, that was 8 years ago. 6 years ago, SEAC did a survey of parents, an online survey. We got 1,600 responses. The report of that survey has been shared with the board. It's in your materials. It shows that this is a real problem. Parents find it very hard. They go to the website, it's hard to find where the materials are. When you get there, much of the information they need isn't there, or it's in jargon, using technical terms that educators know, but many parents don't. Or they're told to go read the special education plan, which is a long, long document that is not meant to be a parent's guide to find out what to do or where to go. We have been raising this with staff at our working group level for 6 months. We've had very good discussions where we went through with staff the website and the brochures that the TDSB makes available, and pointed out over and over why they are suffering from those deficiencies, why the word disability often either doesn't appear or it's not till like page 8 or something. If a parent looks at these and all they know is my kid's having trouble learning and I don't know why and I don't know what to do about it, but I think we may need something new or different, they won't read these materials and get very much helpful information. And the TDSB, to their credit, and no criticism is meant of the particular staff assigned to work with our working group, they've been fantastic in listening, in getting our feedback, line by line feedback. And they also came to us with an action plan last November, which is in your materials for today. Unfortunately, a lot of what's in the action plan hasn't happened. And so we have the same problem. And I think the real problem is that the TDSB, it's not the fault of the staff who were assigned to work with us. I want to be clear. I want to be emphatic. I think TDSB needs to treat this as a much higher priority. A much higher priority. This needs to be handed to the communications branch, who have or should have people who know how to write for parents in a jargon-free way, and they should be using multiple platforms in multiple languages and not the materials we've got now. It's not just tweaking a few lines. This is what we all concluded. Now, I wanted to bring this to this committee to get your feedback and the experiences that your members or the feedback that you have received before we decide what we do next. Because I think at the current rate, things are not going to change to a degree and at a speed that our families need. I mean, we tried raising this in 2016. There's a whole generation of kids who will have graduated without this being solved. The last thing I'm going to say in my introduction is that the TDSB's traditional response is that we've been told at this committee and in our working group is that the responsibility first is with the principal. Well, there are 40,000 students or families who need this information. And I don't know, 580 principals? If they just spend their time repeating the same information to every parent, they're not going to have any time to run their schools. It's not the most efficient way to do things. And this is not unique to TDSB, it's a system-wide problem, but here again, TDSB's got to fix it, and we can't just leave it to the ministry. We need to fix it. And so the question is, what do we do next, and how significant is this in your experience? So could we invite feedback from this committee, both in terms of your sense of the importance of this issue and what, if anything, you think we might do. I'm going to ask Richard to take over the list and the timer.
Okay, perfect. Well, I see Leo first on the list. Nobody else yet, so go ahead, Leo. You have 2 minutes, and I'll let you know when it's 30 seconds.
Thanks. I'm just going to echo something that I've already said in the committee, which I'm a working group, which I'm part of, but I think it's good for the broader group. It's very brief, but essentially we get to speak to parents every week that have concerns.
Organization you're with.
Sorry, David. Yes, representing Autism Ontario. So at Autism Ontario, we end up speaking to parents weekly, and a lot of it is based on advocacy. But it's very interesting because every single conversation that I have, or almost every single conversation, there's a huge chunk of it which is just educational, where I'm actually explaining things from the education plan to those parents. Things as simple as placement options, what an IPRC is, what an IEP is, and people have no clue where to get that information. The principals have not given those people that information correctly. And what happens is that a lot of that work ends up being sent out for associations like my own to do that work for the TDSB. And for me, I think that's just symptomatic that there's an issue within the communication of the TDSB, because if there wasn't, then people would know. If they're asking us, essentially we're doing the school's job every day when we speak to these parents. So thanks.
Thank you, Leo. Do we have anybody else that would... Nora, please go ahead.
I think it's very important the communication department be involved, partially because I think when you're a staff member and you live in that vocabulary world, it's very difficult to divorce yourself from that vocabulary world, and things that make are second nature to, I think, staff for families is completely bewildering. Again, the spec ed plan, like David's mentioned, I understand that's a ministry document and a ministry requirement. It's not parent friendly. It really needs to start with language like disability and perceptions that someone's struggling at school. And I think, again, if the communication department's struggling to find time to do this, I find it inconsistent with the approach about equity, because based on what I read in the report, special education kids are having some pretty struggling outcomes. So who would be more vulnerable? So in my mind, it's back to where David, I think a couple of meetings ago, had talked about, almost being second-class citizens.
It would be especially helpful if our trustees who are either members of SEAC or who are here visiting could let us know, do they get calls from parents who seem to have difficulty knowing about this system and where to find answers. Do you have to end up having to help them with that?
I also have two more speakers.
Okay, well, let's do the two more speakers first.
Okay, and then, so I have Steve, then myself, and then Trustee Hastings. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Richard. Just a very simple one. There are not enough staff to support special ed in the central section, so to speak. You have Nandy, Louise. Tell me anybody else. There is no one in the communications sector designated. There is no communications division for special ed. So the problem is not just how do we do it? The problem is the board has never, and not their fault, provided more than 2 or 3 people to support the entire special ed program of, as we know, 40,000 students, hundreds of principals, thousands of teachers. The communication stream is non-existent. So until there are more people involved specifically in supporting special ed and not just as an afterthought, oh yeah, those guys, things won't change, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So just since I've got my hand up next here, I don't want to read directly from my computer, but I'm looking at my emails, and I do have an inquiry right now on my computer from a parent, and basically they're asking, you know, what program is best for their child? You know, what's the most suitable program in the TDSB? And they're asking me to recommend, you know, what school their child should go to. And obviously we understand that we're not going to recommend a school, but they don't even know what the programs look like for them in their home school, what other options are open to them. And it just seems very complex without the parent communication we're talking about. And I get these on a regular basis. What school do you recommend? We know schools are very dynamic. Principals change, teachers changed. So that is a question that cannot even be answered. But the answer should be, every school is the right school. That should be evident. And every school should provide the programs to support, accommodate those children based on their exceptionality, their disability, their IEP or no IEP. It doesn't happen. So how do we get there? Thank you. And we have Trustee Hastings next, please.
Thank you very much. David? Thank you very much. We do have situations, I do in any case, we have situations where parents are coming to me and saying, I don't know how to do it. And I'm listening to the other speakers saying, every school is the right school, because I've had parents saying, I'd like to pull my kid out of the school that they're in. They're not going anywhere. Teachers, principals, superintendents are not listening to them. So we need to edge that up so that they are listening to them, because you'll have an exceptionality that's so tiny that it's not being recognized as such. So yes, I've seen it. Thank you.
And Trustee Arts.
Thank you. I think I have more what Richard described. Like I have parents that are at the starting point that are like, I don't know where I go, who do I talk to? Or they're coming into our system. And I've not had issues really once I engage them with the principal. Like, but that's not limited to, for me, that's not limited to special education. I would say that's for transitions to high school programs, things like that. But to what Richard said, I think, I'm not 100% sure for other boards, but I get the sense from talking to other boards that the TDSB also has a particular problem, or Toronto as a culture, in terms of like schools are close together. We have optional attendance, which not all boards do. There's a lot of shopping around for schools. And so we have a bit of a culture of assuming, coming to the system, assuming that, you know, not every school is serving. That I would say like an archaic structure when, you know, kids with a lot of needs didn't go to regular school. We sent them somewhere else. Really old structures. I don't think culturally, as a whole, we've moved past that. We work very hard to move past it, but I get that kind of shopping around for a million different reasons, as opposed to and a lot of times what I end up having to say is, have you actually talked to your homeschool? Like have you had a conversation with the principal about the needs? And usually there's two scenarios. Usually if they've come to me, it's because they haven't talked with the principal yet, so they haven't started that route. So as I think in the K-12 group, one of the things we talked about was simplifying the language. As to what Nora said, my kid is struggling, what do I do? Like, just as a starting point, because I think I agree that needs to be more simple and not have all of the ministry kinds of languages and things like that about special education needs. So I think using the language that families are actually using would be awesome. My understanding for communications is that our spec ed staff that's supporting the committee are doing the bulk of the work in terms of the writing, and that communications will come in that publication stage, as opposed to two separate sets of staff doing the same work. But yeah, one of my goals with all kinds of different programming in our system is that inclusion. Like, if we're prioritizing inclusion and strong local schools, then, as to what Richard said, it should be that confident engagement piece. And there's still work we need to do within the TDSB, and then hopefully we also change the culture eventually outside the TDSB as we're better inside the system.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Okay, David is our last speaker.
Thanks. I just want to make 3 points. One is that we have heard from staff and from trustees about the fact that TDSB has a deficit and that it spends more on special education than the province gives it. Here's a way to save money. This isn't a people problem, it's a system problem. To the extent that they don't make this information easy to find and easy to use for people who have different levels of education, different languages spoken, different knowledge of the technical education language, to the extent we don't make it available, it means more staff time must be taken up explaining it to them, principals and teachers and trustees and us as volunteers and our associations. That is extremely inefficient. We could save some money, not have to spend all that staff time if we made the information easier to find. My second point is that this is a problem for all boards, but I think it's especially a problem for TDSB because we're so big. It is hard for any principal to be expected to know all the programs that could serve the needs of children with all kinds of different disabilities and special education needs. But telling people the expectation is go to the principal is exactly expecting the unreasonable of principals. The third thing is the multi-year strategic plan, which is supposed to set the board's priorities, talks over and over not only about tearing down barriers, including procedural barriers, but also honoring parents as partners. Failing to effectively meet this need is inconsistent with that plan. Prioritizing solving this problem is compelled by the strategic plan. So I think all good reason points to let's do more than can reasonably be expected of the staff who have been burdened with this and who've got lots of other things to do. I mean, you can't get more out of them than is reasonable to expect. The board needs to make this a priority. It's not rocket science, but it can be done. Let's move along in our agenda, but I think our next step is to come forward with a concrete recommendations from SEAC at an upcoming meeting. Let us now turn, our next is Karen Murray, I believe.
Yes, Karen Murray is
Okay,
next.
so I'm going to just do a quick introduction. Karen Murray is a known person here at SEAC because she has spoken here some months ago and she asked to come back. We've allocated 15 minutes. She has determined what she'd like to address as a follow-up to her last presentation. Karen, tell us what you do and tell us what you'd like to talk about. And please, if you can, leave 10 minutes for Q&A, that would be great.
Oh, absolutely. And good evening, everyone. I am Karen Murray. I am Assistant Superintendent here in the Toronto District School Board. I hold the portfolio of equity, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and I also have the Center of Excellence for Black Student Achievement. So nice to be with everyone this evening. I'm going to ask a question first. Leanne, will you be sharing my screen? Because I don't have privileges.
Yes, I will. I just need one second to bring it up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So today, this evening, the conversation is actually just a follow-up. It's a follow-up from when I was here last. I was here talking about ableism, actually, and we're talking about how the systems of oppression kind of intersects with the conversation, talking about divergent abilities, etc. And in that conversation, I had identified, thank you, I think my screen's coming up now. Awesome, here we go. So we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So in that conversation on ableism, I had read a quote, and I'm going to read it tonight just for convenience. And then I will explain to you the topic that came up and how I wanted to come back because the question kept coming back around. So what does that mean, that comment you made, Karen? So we talked about ableism. And so ableism, I used the definition by Talia Lewis, who was a community lawyer and a disability advocate. And in that, she said that ableism is a set of stereotypes and practices that devalue and discriminate against people with disability. It assumes that the bodies and minds of non-disabled people are the default, placing value on them based on society's perceptions of what is considered normal. And one of the tensions that I raised, can we go to the next slide, please? I raised the tension that sometimes when we engage in this work, when we're talking around work that deals with oppression in general, we engage in something called the Oppression Olympics. And when I made that comment, we had finished talking, but people came back asking, what does that mean, Karen? What is the Oppression Olympics? So what I wanted to do was just to come back quickly and just share with you what it is, and then talk about, so what does it mean? And then I'll leave it for questions and clarifications. And I also wanted to quickly, and I'll do it at the end, I was furiously jotting down some of the questions and inquiries that came up earlier. And I wanted to just take a minute or two just to give a response to those. But so let's begin, Oppression Olympics. So Oppression Olympics really covers four things. One, it's characterized by ideology and ideological stances. So what does that mean? Is my state of mind, things I believe in, where my belief system, right? But that belief system that it's characterizing speaks to this idea, which is number 2, around contest and competition, right? So it talks about how there's a competition across all overall oppressions um, in regards to what oppression is, right? So, for example, this is number 3, it compares race, gender, socioeconomic status, or disabilities. And when someone is engaging in this action of this oppression Olympics, it is saying is in order to determine who is the worst off and the most oppressed, not recognizing that there's a difference between intersections and the intersectionalities of identity. So let me just take a moment to explain that. The intersections. So when you think of anti-oppression work, when you think of anti-racism work specifically, it talks about this idea of a bell curve. And it talks about how across this U, this mountain-like shape, we could put all these various types of oppressions there. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, etc. But what it talks about that there's an intersection against poverty, disability, sexism, homophobia, etc., that goes right across the middle. So imagine this curve and right across the middle. And what goes right across the middle is race. And what it talks about is that I could be poor, but being Black and poor is different. I can be 2S LGBTQIA+, but in society, race intersects with that differently than it may intersect with someone else. What it isn't saying is one is worse than the other. What it's saying is we just have to be cognizant that does happen. And that is different from the idea that all of us has intersectional identities, meaning I could be many things. I am a Black woman, able-bodied, etc. That's my intersectional of identities. That does not take away from that line, the go-through line, when we talk about this idea of oppression. And as I said, it doesn't take away from who has it worse, or it doesn't compare about worse off. It just says that it's different. Can I get the next slide, please? So what do we do? First, we have to understand our own positionality. Who are we? What is my beliefs and what is my understanding? Hearing the conversation around what oppression Olympics are should not make us feel angry, should not make us feel fragile at all. And if it does, then the question is why? Why would it make us feel like that, right? Where's my belief systems in this conversation? What else do we need to do? We need to deepen our knowledge on oppression. What is oppression? Because oppression looks and feels different to many, many, many different people. And then the third, and I got this from, we do when we create conditions, when we engage in learning, professional learning across this district. We talk a little bit about Senso and D'Angelo's work, and it's for conditions of learning. And the one that I speak to often is this idea about differentiating between our personal opinion and anecdotes. They exist and they're real, but there's a difference between those when it comes to when we think about informed knowledge from data and this broader general pattern of sustained experience, study, and practice, which is things we read from reputable sources, etc. So I hope that explains a little bit of why that comment was made and a little bit about what Oppression Olympics are within the context of the conversation. And I wanted to take this moment to then raise two things. One of the things is the inquiry today about what are ways in which we can bring forward student voice. And there was a narrative around, so about the Student Equity Collective. And so I work very closely actually with the Student Equity Collective. And I wanted to position that in that space, the collective space of students, those students have so many different intersecting identities, and those identities play out in the things they're interested in, and the things that they interested in talking about, and the things they're interested in supporting. And this idea of addressing issues tied to divergent abilities, ableism, etc., is an area in which they do focus on. And so I am saying within larger collectives, they can drill down and engage in specific conversations and inquiries around how to make things be important conversations for the district. So I didn't want to lose sight of that one. And then the last thing I would say is when we talk special education, one of the things that we do know that in the Education Act, the principles of equity and inclusion have guided those principles for a very, very long time. And so I think one of the things I wanted to think about is that in this world, up till this moment, there's many groups of people, many marginalized groups of peoples who have never seen something that made them equal to somebody else. And I just want us to know that that work is 400 years in the making and beyond. And I want us to be able to recognize the importance of making sure that people feel included and they feel that they belong, and the underpinning of equity to support that. Okay, all done. We can stop the slide. I'd love to see somebody and answer any questions that they have.
Okay, I'm probably going to suggest that because we're close to the 15-minute mark, and I know that Nandy has a very substantial report with a bunch of things to cover, I'm thinking that what might be best is if people have feedback that we route it through email or questions, that we use email as our vehicle, because I want to be respectful of your time, of everybody's time. I do want to make two concluding comments of my own, in addition to thanking Karen for her work and for coming, and for a really good chat last week when we were getting to know each other. One is, this is not the time or place, but you and I should have a conversation about a suggestion that inclusion and equity have been at the core of the Education Act. I would actually take a very different view, but that I don't want to take up people's time on that. What I do want to do, because it gets back to what one of our SEAC members, I'm trying to remember if it was Isabella or Bronwyn or one of you earlier, if you look at that definition of ableism that Karen helpfully provided on her first slide, pointing out that it's objectionable to treat the minds and bodies of people without disabilities as somehow normal, the norm against which we are all compared. And that's a very helpful principle of equality and equity that Karen brought forward. The fact is, the Education Act's very term, exceptional pupil, is a fundamental contradiction of that. The reason it basically works on the assumption there are normal students, which is a term that used to be used in the education world. It is thankfully not now. But there are normal students, and then there are exceptional pupils. Exceptional is not meant as a compliment. And exceptionality, it means you're not normal. So in fact, the problem we were talking about earlier, which the board didn't create, it's in the Education Act, is inherently an example of what you described in that definition of ableism. And that's unfortunately something we're all handcuffed by, but the duty to accommodate and what we were talking about earlier provides us a way out that we should aspire towards. Thank you, Karen, very much for your time. You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to dialogue on email with folks. And if you forward your questions to Leanne, she can forward them to Karen. Nandy, you got a big staff report and you got a lot to cover, so let's pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night. I'll put myself back on mute.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will share with you briefly today the leadership report, and we're coming towards the end of the school year, very hard to believe, but we're still moving forward with the work. So we're pleased to announce our third and final webinar for parents, guardians, caregivers. One will be a morning session on May 28th, and one will be an evening session on May 29th. And we will be looking at transitions for students, as well as how families can support students with disabilities and special education needs over the summer months, as well as programs we will be offering in the TDSB over the summer. We've also uploaded to the Public Special Education and Inclusion website fact sheet number 2, which delves deeper into students with special education needs and disabilities in the Toronto District School Board, and actually explores some comparisons between students in the TDSB and GTA boards, as well as the province of Ontario, with regards to intersections between special education needs, disabilities, and other variables such as race, income, and gender. Thank you so much to the SEAC Special Education Plan Working Group for your recommendations. We have looked at the recommendations along with recommendations from other families, staff members, community members, and we have provided for you with the meeting mail out the list of recommendations that will be going to board for receipt. And then those will be submitted, as always, to the ministry by the end of July. And so I think it was Richard that mentioned earlier that the special education plan, or perhaps it was Leo, it's a plan that is outlined by the ministry in terms of what needs to be in the plan, what sections or standards, they call them, need to be in the plan. And it's not meant to be something that contains every bit of information for every student with disabilities or special education needs. That is why the ministry actually asks for a parent guide to special education to be included with the package that goes to the ministry. However, the TDSB Special Education Plan has met all of the requirements of the standards for school board special education plans. Just to provide an update, we had at SEAC previously staff from legal, myself, as well as the policy department come to speak about the special education identification, placement, and appeal procedure. And thank you so much to SEAC for your feedback in terms of the composition of the committee for the appeal. And we have landed based on your feedback as well as feedback from the GPC trustees that having a trustee with no prior knowledge of the case, as well as a superintendent from another area with no prior knowledge of the case, as well as the system superintendent of special education and inclusion as part of that committee for making determinations on special education appeal board recommendations. So we've included that, and that will be going to the May 22nd board meeting for final determination. We held a deaf, hard of hearing basketball tournament this year, and this is the 12th annual tournament, and we had a principal that volunteered to coach the team. And we competed against Drury Provincial School for the Deaf, and the students on the deaf, hard of hearing team for the itinerant students part of the itinerant team were successful and won the championship game there. And just interesting to note, in the world that we live in with technology, the coach was able to use an RMT, or remote microphone technology system, to communicate with the students on the court as he was coaching. We continue to partner with early years and literacy to offer sessions around early reading intervention tools. And so we've added more schools to our Empower and Wilson reading programs. And we will be continuing with those next year and efforts towards deepening the use of Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention strategies and building teacher capacity in using these strategies in their classrooms. And finally, at the Unleashing Learning Conference, special education and inclusion staff, including staff on the assistive technology team, shared resources for other staff attending the session. And we also had a teacher from ECPP, Education Community Partnership Program, that presented a workshop on wellness and mental health supported by technology. That concludes the leadership report, and I welcome any questions. Thanks.
Nandy, thank you very much. And let's see who's got questions.
Looking around the room, I see no hands raised, and looking online, I do not see any hands raised. Does anybody have any questions? I guess maybe I will ask a quick question then, and it goes back to my earlier one about the special education plan and the discussion on IEPs in it. If it is missing or silent on that, is there any chance that might be able to be put forward for this year's issue of the special education plan as opposed to waiting a year for the next issue?
Thanks, Richard. I'm pretty sure it's in there because we also have it in our parent guide to the referral process. And so as an example, we have a whole section on any student, first of all, that requires special education supports will get them. But when we're talking specifically about the IEP, we have in there specifically that if a student requires accommodation specific to the student for more than one term or a semester, they will be placed in an IEP. And again, I don't want to make a blanket statement because if a student requires, for example, an FM system that is unique to them, they will get an IEP and that will be on their IEP right off the bat. We don't need them to wear an FM system for a whole term or semester before we say, okay, now you get an IEP. But there is information in the referral guide, and our referral guide was taken in part from the special education plan, but I will go back, and if it's not there, we will copy the language over from the parent guide to the referral process, Richard, and put it in the special education plan.
Thank you. Oh, Leo has his hand up.
Yeah. Thanks, Nandy. I just have a quick question. I noticed that you shared the second fact sheet, and I was looking over it during this week, and I thought it was very interesting. It presents a lot of data. What I would like to know is if there's going to be some kind of plan to actually try to dive in later to the data and actually see an action plan for it, or if you wouldn't have an answer. There's something here which I find a bit concerning, and maybe there's a good explanation for it. But when you look at the levels of autism exceptionality within the TDSB, they are roughly around 7%, whereas in the GTA, they're closer to 10%. And so that gap might signal that maybe we are not really giving the designation to students that might have that disability. I'm assuming that it should follow what's in the population, right? So if our number is lower, I'm just trying to understand that a little bit more. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. So with regards to data, and this is working closely with the research department, anything within 3% is considered similar, Leo. So if it's 7% to 10%, or if it's 10% to 13%, then they don't take that as being a discrepancy. But I don't have an explanation as to why. We see lots of variances, but that's not such a staggering difference, if you will, from a research perspective, in terms of why there's 7 versus 10%. But I just also want to draw your attention that as part of the meeting mail out, we did include the annual, no, actually it was sent before the meeting mail out, the annual report for the department that outlined all of the work for this year that was sent out earlier in the week and has a lot of data in there as well. And as you may recall from that report, we are looking to do a review of the TDSB's model for special education in terms of how we provide programs and services for students with disabilities and special education needs next year. So we're really interested to dig a little deeper and to flesh out some of the reasons for some of our data.
Nora has her hand up. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, and when you're doing that, is the research department helping you with that? Is that what's
Sorry?
happening? So will the research department be helping you with like a jurisdictional scan and then also looking at like outcomes and what evidence-based by exceptionalities have said through research? Are they helping you with all of that?
Yeah, we get support from multiple departments, Nora, but in the annual report, section 4 or part 4 is all about outcomes for students with special education needs. So the annual report has 4 sections, and it's really about who are the students with disabilities and special education needs in the TDSB and how are they doing. And part 4 is all about outcome data.
Right, I'm just saying when you're looking at models,
yes,
you'll be looking at
oh
what
yeah,
research
jurisdictional
says
scan.
models are
Yes.
better for which
Yes.
groups and why. Okay.
Yes, and we've started to gather some of that data, especially around intensive support programs. Some boards have none. In terms of a diagnostic kindergarten program, as an example, boards do not have special education classes for kindergarten students because it's quite early to stream them in kindergarten when they haven't. We know students develop differently in the early years.
And I have one last quick clarification question. When you say special education, students with special education needs, so we have the identified population, we have kids on IEPs. Some boards actually have kids that don't have IEPs, but are receiving service from somebody. So an example could be a child in grade 1 seeing an SLP. And they might indicate, does TDSB follow that practice? So they do.
Yeah.
So when you report to us, and say they're the kids with IEPs and the kids that have exceptionalities, are they falling into the category of the kids with the IEPs even though they don't have an IEP because they're getting service?
So we have, so if you, again, it's in the special education plan, so, sorry, the special education annual report. I'm just going to go up. I know off the top of my head that of the 17% of students identified as students with special education needs, and we use special education needs because that's the language from the ministry, 10% of them are on IEPs without an identification or an exceptionality, and 7% of that 17% are have been formally identified. However, if there are students who need any special education programs or services, SLP or anything else, PTOT, they do receive that, and they typically are captured on an IEP because it's unique to that student.
Right, so I was just asking, so you do, all your kids are on IEP if they're getting service?
That's
right. You
right.
don't have kids getting service that don't have IEP?
If it's unique to them. So we know that accommodations, for example, can be good teaching, and it's accommodations that can benefit everybody in the class. So if it's not an accommodation that's unique to that student, and I believe Diane alluded to this earlier, they don't need an IEP for that. However, if it's an accommodation that is unique to them, that they need in an ongoing manner, you know, year after year, term after term, absolutely, they have their IEP, which would identify that.
Thank you. Final question will be Alana Bell. Oh, and I see Leo after Alana, and that's cut off.
Yeah, it's very.
Alana first, though.
Thank you. You mentioned that there will be a review next year. I'm assuming that we will be communicated and involved in that. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Alana, please.
Hi, thank you. That was actually going to be part of my question as well, that when that review comes up, we'll be involved in the review. But then I had another few questions. I found this data really fascinating, and I wondered if we would have the chance to dig into it a little deeper. I had some questions around it, and I'm not sure whether this is even the right opportunity to ask. But for example, I saw that the data around students with special education needs was desegregated by things like gender and income and so on. Or sorry, not disaggregated is the word that I was looking for there. And I was wondering about if there's a possibility of seeing disaggregation by mental health and wellness and those kinds of things as well.
Sorry, no, we don't collect data based on mental health at this point. That would intersect with this part of it, but I could certainly take that question back to the research department.
Thank you. Over to you, David.
Yeah, thank you, Nandy. Thank you very much. And I think you could will not at all be surprised that we would like to be very, very involved in the review of the special education program. And it would be especially helpful if we could build our involvement in early, so it's not a matter of coming to us at the end, but coming to us at the beginning and the middle and the end, if at all possible. I know your hours are limited, but finding ways to do that. And if we get a chance to talk about it, let's figure a way to streamline it so that it's takes up the least time of our committee members and the least time of yours, and yet gets you the maximum input. So let's follow up on that. Thank you very much. Let us now, I'm mindful of the 9 o'clock approaching. Let us, Leanne, did we in fact, can you confirm whether the minutes were in fact sent out?
Yes, they were.
All right. Could we have a motion to approve the minutes of the April meeting?
Motion to approve the minutes. Tracy first. Do we have a seconder? Leo second. All in favor? Any opposed, please raise your hand. Seeing none opposed, carried. We also have the trustees report.
Yes, we're going to do trustees report. Do you have we're going to do trustees and association reports. Before I do that, I just want to give everybody a heads up. We have 3 upcoming meetings, which are going to be, I'm hoping, especially kind of cool. In June, we have the chair of the TDSB coming. In September, we have the director of education coming, and God willing, October is going to be our chance to hold a kind of a town hall meeting to invite students and parents to come and just talk to us. I want to strongly encourage as many of you as possible to attend in person. I was about the biggest holdout when Jean-Paul was doing a masterful job of trying to convince us to start coming back to meetings. JP, you were right, and I was wrong. And I'm very happy to be back here. If the more that can come, we've got a really good atmosphere here. And I'd like people to get a chance to meet each other because we've had so many new members join since we last met in person long before the plague hit. So please, if you can, if you can't, we understand and respect this, the option of staying at home and coming online, but if you can come in person, that would really help. Trustees reports, and I want to not limit this to trustees who are formal members of SEAC. Any trustee who's here, if you want to chime in for 2 minutes and give us what's going on at the Board of Trustees that's relevant to our kids that we should know about, let's do it.
Who would like?
Hi, David. It's Trustee Yars. I'll give it a start, and then
sure.
The big thing, of course, is always is budget, and I really want to thank the SEAC and the budget committee here for the work that was done earlier this year with Craig. As you may have heard, that as boards, we've had a big curveball thrown at us in that the grants for student needs are no longer called the grants for student needs. They are now called core education funding, and it has been a massive overhaul of the structure that has left us with we don't entirely know what this means yet. Poor Craig has a binder that is about 4 inches thick, and his team of all the new rules on funding. So in addition to the regular budget things, I would maybe encourage that we have the finance team come back again. As of our finance meeting last week, they haven't had time to go through and see what the changes are. But it's a significant change in structure. So I don't have a good sense. I don't think there's a huge change in the dollar amounts coming through. There certainly isn't new money anywhere. There's no shiny new funding. Trustee associations, education associations are pushing back actually pretty hard with the government right now. There's some tension going on because there's no really big shiny new, like there's really no increase, and the kind of increase they've brought forward does not keep up with inflation. So in fact, in the end, ends up being a bit of a decrease. We've committed as a board to not touch anything school-based, but we do have ancillary programs like adult education, community use of schools, some extracurricular stuff, which we have been, or even some outdoor ed that where we've been subsidizing as a board that we can't afford to keep subsidizing, and we're trying to figure out how to move forward with that. So school staffing will stay the same. One of the things that I don't have a good answer for, and maybe we want to hear from finance staff at a later date, the education structure has changed, and the flexibility in those structures has changed. There's a lot more what they call enveloping or sweatering of money, where it's not as easy to move money around from one pocket to another. And all boards have depended on that flexibility in order to fund their cost overruns, especially in areas like special education. So there's some areas where we can move money around, but there's much more restrictions on how money gets moved or is able to be moved around between the ministries' categories. So definitely more. I definitely think we should have Craig back at some point and the team back to talk about what that means for our system once they have that all that information nailed down.
All right, thank you very much. We are down to our last 3 minutes, so let us see if we have any other.
Trustee McLean.
Trustee McLean, and do we have any association reports? Just before you go, Trustee McLean, let's see, are there any association reports? If not, Trustee McLean will be our last speaker.
Not seeing any association reports.
Okay.
Reports at the moment.
Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and I'm cognizant of the time, so I'll try to respect the good work that's going on in regards to that. I just wanted to add to Trustee Arts's talk about the budget that we did in fact have 4 budget town hall meetings throughout different areas of the city. We had 40 to 50 people in person come out to them. It was a little harder to gauge the online turnout, which we thought was a little higher, but the online wasn't quite as conducive to asking questions. So we are in a challenging position, and I just wanted to share that we have again gone out to the community and done a survey which invited parents and community members and the public to participate in and try to get a sense of where they line up. So just a little bit of additional budget information there. Thank you.
All right, very good. Well, thank you all very much. We're going to finish 30 seconds early. Thank you for everybody who's come out, to everybody who's come online. Thanks to all those who are viewing us remotely. And thanks to all the staff, especially Leanne, but to everybody and their IT support for enabling us to be able to do this so efficiently. Take care, and we will next be meeting on the 10th of June. I don't think we need a motion to adjourn, but if anybody wants to, go ahead. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I think we've all made that motion.
We're all in favor.
All in favor.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.